A Russian vehicle can hide from one drone. It can hide from a single satellite pass. It struggles to hide from Delta, Ukraine's battle management network. Because Delta runs on dozens of sensor types at once, all of them reporting into the same live map. Built since around 2016 out of Aerorozvidka, a volunteer drone reconnaissance group, Delta pulls drone footage, satellite imagery, ground sensors, and soldier reports into one picture that opens in an ordinary web browser. No specialized hardware is required to read it. Ukrainian officials have put the running count of logged sightings in the hundreds of thousands and climbing. Beat the drone with camouflage netting, and a ground sensor a kilometer away, or roughly 0.6 of a mile, may still catch the movement. Russian state media has claimed the network was hacked. Ukraine's Ministry of Defense says that is false. The question is what happens to a hiding place once several independent sensors are watching the same ground. For most of this war's first year, the majority of units still worked the old way. Paper maps, radio callouts, Excel spreadsheets passed between headquarters that often could not see each other's screens. A drone crew spotting a column of vehicles had to relay coordinates by voice down a chain of officers, each one replotting the same point on their own map. Every handoff cost minutes and added room for error. A smaller circle of early adopters, mostly the volunteer units that had built the tool themselves, were already running an early version of Delta informally, well before the wider military caught up. Delta's later expansion collapsed that voice relay chain into a single shared display. One map, one set of icons, updated by everyone who has eyes on the front, visible to everyone who needs to act on it. The system did not start as a state project. It grew out of Aerorozvidka, a group of volunteer engineers and hobbyist drone pilots formed in 2014 who spent years doing drone reconnaissance in the war's Eastern Front Zone, stitching geotagged footage into something closer to a live map than a stack of printed photographs. Ukraine's Ministry of Defense formally absorbed the effort under its Center for Innovation and Development of Defense Technologies in 2023. In July 2024, Defense Minister Rustem Umerov announced that Delta had passed a security audit built to NATO's own standards, calling it, in his words, the first time in Ukraine's history a military system had been certified to the standards NATO countries use. A year later, in August 2025, Defense Minister Denis Shmyhal, who by then held the defense portfolio, signed the order mandating Delta at every level of Ukraine's defense forces, from headquarters down to the units still catching up to what the early adopters had been running for years. 2 officials, 2 years, 2 different milestones. The first confirmed the system met an external technical bar. The second made it mandatory. Those are separate claims and they should stay separate. A system can be certified and still not be universally adopted. And a system can be mandated without every unit reaching full use on the day the order is signed. The stakes here are practical, and they run wider than speed. In a war where a target can relocate, camouflage, or disperse within minutes of being spotted, hiding has always been the cheapest defense available. A convoy that scatters into tree lines the moment one drone appears has historically bought itself real safety. One drone is one sensor, and one sensor has blind spots. Delta's premise is that once enough different sensors report into the same picture, the convoy's problem stops being avoid the drone and becomes avoid every sensor at once. That is a much harder problem, and dispersal alone does not solve it. Picture the old way this worked. What follows is the general pattern reported across the war's early phase, not a single dated incident. A forward observer spots movement and radios a grid reference to a company command post. The post relays it up to battalion. Battalion checks it against their own paper map, then radios back down to whichever battery happens to be listening on that frequency. Every link in that chain is a place for the message to be misheard, mistranscribed, or simply delayed while an officer finishes another call. By the time a gun crew has a firing solution, the vehicle that triggered the whole chain may have already moved into cover. Delta's answer is not a faster radio. It removes the chain. The observer's report becomes an icon on a shared map the instant it is logged, visible at the same moment to everyone downstream with the authority to act on it. One distinction matters before going further. Delta by itself is not a fire control calculator. A separate Ukrainian tool called Kropiva, an artillery-focused app used at the gun line, handles the ballistic math, elevation, charge, correction for wind. Outside reporting frequently confuses the two, and they are different systems. Delta is the shared operational picture, the map everyone reads from. Kropiva is one of the tools that reads a target off that map and turns it into a firing solution. They interoperate, but they are built, maintained, and updated separately. The distinction clarifies what Delta actually solves, not the math of the shot, but the speed and completeness of knowing where to point the gun in the first place. A third name, GIS ARTA, sometimes appears in outside coverage as if it were interchangeable with either tool. It is neither the map nor the firing calculator. Treat any report that uses the three names as synonyms with caution. Ukraine's ecosystem of battlefield software is built from several distinct, separately maintained tools, not one program wearing three labels. Everything Delta can see comes from what flows into it. Drone operators upload footage and coordinates directly from the field. Satellite imagery, where Ukraine has access to it, layers in wider area confirmation over ground a single drone could never cover. Fixed ground sensors and static cameras add persistent coverage of specific roads and crossings, watching a choke point around the clock long after any one drone has run out of battery and come home. And soldiers themselves, anyone with an authorized login, can log a sighting directly into the map, an enemy vehicle, a trench line, a suspected command post. Ukrainian officials have cited different snapshots of the system's volume at different points in the war, from tens of thousands of new entries a month up toward the low millions as adoption spread and more units came online. Those figures come from the Ministry of Defense itself. Read them as official claims about the system's growth, not an independently audited count. That layering is the mechanism. A single sensor type carries a single set of blind spots. A drone has limited flight time and a camera that only sees what it is currently pointed at. A satellite has a fixed revisit schedule and cannot loiter. A ground sensor covers only the ground it sits on. Camouflage, dispersal, movement timing, every one of those countermeasures is built to exploit one sensor's specific weakness, and none of them automatically defeats a different sensor's. Delta's whole design is to make sure that whichever sensor does catch a target, everyone else sees it too. A position invisible to the drone overhead may still be visible to the ground sensor watching the same road, or to the soldier who spotted the same vehicle 3 days earlier and logged it once already. Hiding from a network built this way means beating every sensor type at once, not just the nearest one. Russian forces have their own well-documented answer to being watched: disperse before a strike lands, relocate equipment after firing, keep vehicles moving rather than parked in one visible location for long. The general shoot and scoot pattern reported across artillery and air defense units throughout the war. That pattern works well against a single slow sensor. By the time a report has traveled up and down a voice relay chain, the position it describes may already be empty. It works far less well against a network that logs the same movement from a second angle within minutes, because relocating out of one sensor's field of view does nothing about a second sensor already watching the road the vehicle is moving down. The tactic that used to buy safety, moving before the report finishes traveling, loses most of its value once the report stops needing to travel at all. The interface, called Delta Monitor, looks less like a military command display and more like a layered version of a consumer mapping app. Users toggle layers on and off, friendly positions, confirmed enemy equipment, sightings still marked unconfirmed. It is the same instinct that lets a delivery app show live traffic over a street map without demanding specialist training to read it. A brigade commander can see the whole front. A platoon leader filters down to just the 2 kilometers or roughly a mile and a quarter in front of their own position. That is a deliberate break from older command and control software, which tended to assume its user was a trained staff officer with time to read a dense display. Delta assumes its user might be reading the screen for 4 seconds between 2 other tasks, which is closer to how a soldier under fire actually interacts with a screen than a system built for a quiet headquarters ever was. A system built this way is genuinely hard for Russia to copy, and the obstacle is not technology. Delta assumes information should flow upward from whoever spots something first, a drone operator, a sergeant, a volunteer, straight into a picture everyone above them can see. Russian military reporting culture has, by the account of Western defense policy analysts studying the war, historically run the opposite direction. Information collected at the bottom and filtered, summarized and controlled as it moves up, with commanders wary of subordinates seeing more of the picture than their rank requires. That is a cultural and institutional habit, not a line of code, and it is far harder to rewrite than software. A country can buy servers and satellite terminals in months. Changing whether a colonel trusts a private's drone footage enough to act on it in real time is a different kind of problem, and it is one no single system of guns or jammers fixes on its own. Delta itself is hard to disrupt for architectural reasons. That is a separate point from being unhackable, and nobody serious claims it is. Every networked system can be attacked. Delta runs in the cloud, accessed through a browser, which spreads its workload across commercial data center infrastructure rather than a single command bunker whose loss would take the whole picture down at once. Connectivity rides largely on Starlink, the satellite internet network, which is far harder to jam at scale than a fixed radio relay or a buried fiber line, and far harder to physically target than a command post with a known coordinate. Think of it less like a single tower broadcasting to a city, which falls the moment the tower falls, and more like a swarm of independent radio sets that can each reach the network on its own, so that losing 1, or 10, or 100 still leaves the rest talking. That same volume is the system's own quiet vulnerability, and Russia has nothing to do with it. Hundreds of thousands of reports logged by everyone from career officers to a volunteer with a drone and a phone leave the system only as trustworthy as its own filtering. A wrong grid reference. A duplicate sighting logged by 2 different units. A vehicle reported as present that was destroyed an hour earlier. All of it has to be caught before it turns into a wasted shell or a strike on the wrong target. Delta cross-references multiple reports before marking an icon confirmed rather than suspected. But no system built this way fully escapes the tension between speed and certainty. The faster the picture updates, the less time anyone has to double-check any single piece of it. 2 separate tests of that architecture have to be kept apart rather than folded into one story. In December 2022, Ukrainian journalist Yuri Butusov reported that hackers gained a degree of access to Delta using credentials and malware traced to 2 compromised military personnel. An intrusion Ukraine's own security service attributed to a Russian military intelligence unit. That is a real documented incident, and Ukrainian officials characterized the resulting damage as limited, though independent reporting does not confirm exactly what, if anything, was extracted before it was caught. Separately, Russian state media claimed later that same year that Delta had been fully compromised, a far larger claim than the Butusov report actually supports. Ukraine's Ministry of Defense denied that broader claim outright, calling it disinformation and stating no unauthorized breach of the system itself had occurred. One is a documented, attributed, officially minimized intrusion. The other is an unconfirmed one-sided claim. Collapsing them into a single headline would be exactly the kind of overstatement a sourced explainer has to avoid. The interoperability testing that followed was deliberate, and it goes back years. Delta was tested at the Coalition Warrior Interoperability Exercise known as QUIX as early as 2019 and again in 2023 and 2024, and presented at NATO's Tide Sprint Gathering multiple times since 2022. An event built specifically to check whether Allied command systems can trade data without a human retyping it by hand. Those exercises confirmed Delta can exchange information using NATO's own formats, including its standard map graphics format and the Multilateral Interoperability Program data standard. Demonstrations also showed it passing information through Link 16, the tactical data link NATO aircraft, including the F-16 use. That is a demonstrated technical capability. It is not a claim that Delta already feeds live targeting to F-16 pilots in combat today. What the testing establishes is that the underlying data format checks out, the prerequisite an operational link would need before it could exist at all. As of April 2025, Ukrainian officials said at least one NATO member state had formally explored acquiring Delta through a government-to-government agreement. The reporting available does not name the country, and neither will this episode. The direction of the interest still matters on its own. A system built by wartime volunteers is now being evaluated by an established alliance member as something to adopt, rather than admire from a distance. Go back to the number from the cold open. Hundreds of thousands of sightings and climbing, by Ukrainian officials' own description, logged across drone, satellite, ground sensor, and soldier reports at once. That claim is about coverage more than speed, and coverage is what answers the question this episode opened with. A targeting chain that ran on paper and radio could only be as fast as its slowest human link. It could also only ever see as much as the handful of observers physically watching at any moment. A system pulling in that many independent reports does more than outrun the old chain. It watches a great deal more ground at once, and that is the real reason a target's options for disappearing keep shrinking. If you have made it this third of the way through, you already have the mechanism. What is left is the proof, the honesty about where that proof runs out, and what still has to be taken on faith. Subscribing costs nothing and keeps this kind of sourced explainer coming. The clearest single-dated proof point is the July 2024 certification. Umarov's statement was specific and attributable, a named official, a named month, and a checkable claim that a military system had been certified to NATO's own standards for the first time in the country's history. It does not prove Delta wins engagements on its own. It does prove the system's technical claims were substantial enough for NATO's testers to put them through a formal standard rather than take Ukraine's word for it. That is a more concrete kind of evidence than a battlefield anecdote. Past that single certified event, the record turns into credited association rather than itemized proof, and it deserves the same care as everything else here. Ukrainian officials have credited Delta, in an official statement, with a role across four of the war's major turning points: the defense of Kyiv in early 2022, the strikes on Black Sea Fleet assets that year, the liberation of Snake Island, and the Kherson withdrawal. A separate lower-tier account adds the Kharkiv counteroffensive to that list. That fifth claim is noted here but treated as less firmly sourced than the other four. All of it comes from the government's own characterizations. No independently itemized case study ties one specific Delta report to one specific strike. Read that way, it still means something, a consistent presence, by the government's own account, across the campaigns Ukraine considers its clearest successes, even without a documented chain of custody from one icon on a screen to one confirmed kill. The same caution applies further out. Sourcing has also linked Delta, in general terms, to the broader targeting effort behind later long-range strikes on targets inside Russia, without establishing it as the specific tool that produced any one final coordinate. That association is noted here, not claimed as confirmed. The economics deserve naming plainly, even without a precise dollar figure to hang them on. American support for Delta's development and its hardening against electronic warfare has been reported in the millions of dollars without a confirmed exact total or a single named funding channel. The shape of the trade is clear enough. A browser-based system running on commodity hardware and satellite terminals is orders of magnitude cheaper to field at scale than the dedicated, purpose-built command and control hardware that older militaries, including Russia's, have historically relied on. Software that runs on a phone or a laptop scales the way an app scales. Custom military hardware scales the way a factory does, and factories are slower and far more expensive to expand. Here is the moment the mechanism gets tested. It is the pattern this whole system exists to produce, not any single dated strike. A drone spots a column moving to new cover. The operator logs it. The icon appears on every authorized screen at once. A ground sensor a few kilometers away, watching the road the column is heading toward, logs a second, independent confirmation before the column has finished dispersing. A battery 3 kilometers away, or almost 2 miles, sees both reports in the same instant a brigade commander does. No radio relay. No replotted coordinate. No single blind spot left uncovered long enough to matter. This is also where the honesty has to hold. Delta has real flaws. The Center for Strategic and International Studies has documented that the system's cloud dependency creates gaps in low connectivity frontline areas, exactly where a live picture matters most. A soldier with no signal is back to the old paper and radio problem Delta was built to end. Bureaucratic hiring rules inside the Ministry of Defense have slowed how fast the system's management team can grow to match its expanding user base. And frontline units and headquarters staff do not always agree on how well the tool performs day to day. A gap that gets far less attention than the NATO testing and matters just as much to the soldiers using it. None of that erases what Delta has done to the targeting chain. It does mean the system is a work in progress fielded under fire, not a finished product. Russia's own answer to a network it cannot destroy in one strike has been jamming and cyber intrusion rather than a strike on any headquarters, because there is no single headquarters to strike. So far, that answer has produced one documented, attributed intrusion that Ukraine says did limited damage, and one denied hacking claim that no independent source has substantiated. What Delta changed about this war was never any single strike. It changed the shape of the decision cycle underneath every strike, and the size of the area a target now has to disappear from. For most of military history, the side with better artillery or better aircraft won the exchange of fire. Delta is a bet that in a drone war, the side watching more ground through more sensors, tied into one shared picture, wins the exchange of information first, and the fire follows from that. It inverts a century of assumptions about what makes an army dangerous. Tank counts and aircraft numbers still matter, but none of it moves fast enough to matter first if the other side already knows exactly where to look. 3 things worth watching from here. First, whether the reported interest from at least one NATO member state in acquiring or licensing Delta produces a named agreement, which would be the clearest signal yet that Ukraine's network has moved from wartime improvisation to exportable doctrine. Second, whether Russia shifts from denying it was hacked to fielding a comparable fused picture of its own, rather than relying on jamming and intrusion attempts against a system it still cannot outsee. That would be a large undertaking. It would mean rebuilding the reporting culture this episode already flagged as the harder-than-software problem, and not simply standing up new servers. Third, whether the gap between headquarters confidence and frontline usability closes, because a targeting network is only as fast as the soldier at the far end of it is willing to trust the icon on the screen. The lesson underneath all of it is the plainest one. In this war, coverage has become a weapon in its own right, and the side watching more of the map through more independent sensors holds an advantage no single gun or drone can match alone. That lesson will not stay confined to this one war. Every military watching Ukraine closely, allied and otherwise, is drawing the same conclusion from the same evidence, which is exactly why a NATO testing floor and a network built by wartime volunteers ended up in the same story. Next time, a different piece of that picture, and the countermeasure built specifically to blind it.